Donald, I know, because you are Ivana Trump, you're famously linked to Donald. He's free at the moment, isn't he? He's single.
Yes, he is.
Would you not like to get back together with him?
Nope.
Really?
Yes.
She came from behind the Iron Curtain with almost nothing and ended up one of the most recognizable women on the planet. She built an empire alongside a man who would become president, survived a divorce that tore through the tabloids like a wrecking ball, and then tried again and again and again to find something that would last. But the story of Ivana Trump's 4 marriages is far more complicated, far sadder, and far more fascinating than the headlines ever let on. This is Ivana Trump, the tragic story of her 4 marriages. The girl from Zlin. Before there was a penthouse on Fifth Avenue, before the Diamonds and the Plaza Hotel and the front page of the New York Post, there was a small city in Czechoslovakia called Gottwaldov, now known as Zlín, and a girl who had already decided she was going somewhere. Ivana Marie Zelničková was born on February 20th, 1949, into a country that had been swallowed whole by communist rule. Her father, Miloš, was an electrical engineer. Her mother, Marie, worked as a telephone operator. By most accounts, it was an ordinary household in an extraordinary set of circumstances, a family trying to make a decent life inside a system that made decent lives very difficult to build. The city itself, Gottwaldov, had been renamed in 1949 after the communist leader Klement Gottwald, a fairly unsubtle signal of what kind of place it now was. Ordinary people did ordinary things and did not attract attention. Attracting attention was dangerous. What set Ivana apart from almost the beginning was a physical fearlessness that most children her age simply didn't have. She began skiing competitively at the age of 6. By 12, she was in a national training program. Through her teenage years, she traveled across Europe for tournaments, becoming genuinely competitive in a sport that required a very specific kind of nerve. Skiing at that level is not something you do halfway. The margins are brutal, the risks are real, and the people who rise through it tend to have a relationship with pressure that serves them well in other arenas later. Czechoslovakia, during the 1950s and 1960s, was a country where most people did not dream too loudly. The communist government controlled travel, employment, and education. Getting permission to leave the country, even briefly, even for sporting events, required government clearance. Ivana was, in a sense, lucky to be an athlete. Athletes could sometimes travel. Athletes had a reason to cross borders that the state would sanction, and every trip she made outside Czechoslovakia was a glimpse of a world that operated by entirely different rules. She enrolled at Charles University in Prague in 1967, studying physical education. The timing was significant. In 1968, Czechoslovakia briefly lurched towards something resembling reform, a period known as the Prague Spring, when the communist leadership attempted to liberalize the system, allow more freedom of expression, and open the economy. It lasted about 8 months before Soviet tanks rolled across the border in August 1968 and crushed it. Ivana was 19 years old when that happened. She watched a moment of real hope get extinguished in real time, and she understood, with the kind of clarity that only comes from proximity, what it actually meant to live under a system that would do that. Later in life, she would claim to have been selected as an alternate for the Czechoslovak ski team at the 1972 Winter Olympics. The claim has been disputed. The Czechoslovak Olympic Committee's records show no female alpine skiers on the team that year, and fact-checkers have confirmed the records support the committee's position. Whatever the precise details of her career at that level, the broader picture holds. She was a serious, competitive athlete who moved in those circles and who spent years training, competing, and traveling in a way that gave her a perspective most of her compatriots simply did not have. What she knew by the early 1970s was that she wanted out, not as a defector, not as someone who would be cut off from her family forever, but through some door that would let her go and still let her come back. She was going to need help finding that door, and she found it in the form of a friendship with a young Austrian skier named Alfred Winklmayr. Marriage 1. Alfred Winklmayr and the escape from Czechoslovakia. The first marriage in Ivana's life was not really a marriage in the way the word is usually understood. It was, by every account, including statements from her own lawyer, something closer to a well-executed plan. In 1971, Ivana married Alfred Winklmayr, an Austrian ski instructor she had met through her sporting world. He was 25. She was 22. They were, by her own description, friends. Her lawyer, Michael Kennedy, would later describe the union explicitly as a Cold War marriage, a term that cuts right to the heart of what it was. Living under communist rule in Czechoslovakia meant that leaving the country without government permission was not just difficult, it was nearly impossible for ordinary citizens. Defecting, crossing the border and not coming back, meant cutting yourself off from your family permanently, and permanently was a long time. Ivana did not want to abandon her parents. She wanted freedom, but she also wanted the right to return and see the people she loved. The only way to have both was to leave legally, with papers that gave her the right to go and the right to come back. Marrying Winklmayr gave her a legal path out. As his wife, she could obtain Austrian citizenship, which meant an Austrian passport, which meant the ability to travel outside the Eastern Bloc without defecting. It was, in the cold language of necessity, a transaction, and both parties apparently understood it that way. Kennedy stated clearly that the marriage was never consummated and that the couple never lived together. Winklmayr agreed to help a friend. Ivana agreed to the terms. They went to Prague, signed the documents, and that was the sum total of it. In March 1972, she received her Austrian passport. In September 1972, she emigrated to Canada. In August 1973, after a mandatory waiting period, the marriage was formally dissolved. From beginning to end, the entire arrangement spanned roughly 2 years and served its exact purpose. It got Ivana Zelnichkova out from behind the Iron Curtain and into a world where she could actually move. The fact that she engineered this before she was 23, with no significant resources and under a system that was actively hostile to people trying to leave, is worth sitting with for a moment. It was a genuinely audacious thing to do. What she did with that freedom says everything about who she was. She arrived in Canada with her language skills. She spoke Czech, German, and French, and would later add English and Russian, and quickly found her footing in Montreal, working first as a ski instructor and then building toward a modeling career. She was strikingly beautiful, athletically built, and possessed of a confidence that photographers respond to instinctively. The modeling work picked up steadily, and by the mid-1970s, she was good enough at it to be brought to New York City for promotional work, the kind of assignment that in that era often led somewhere larger for women who had the right combination of looks, determination, and presence. She had all three. She was also, by every account, extraordinarily disciplined. The years of competitive skiing had built a relationship with hard work and delayed gratification that most models her age simply did not have. She trained, she prepared, she showed up on time and delivered. These qualities, more than her appearance, seemed to be what made her stand out to the people who mattered in the New York fashion world of the mid-1970s. By the mid-1970s, she had made her way to New York City for work in the fashion industry. And in 1976, at a restaurant in Manhattan, she was introduced to a young real estate developer named Donald Trump. The escape from Czechoslovakia had worked. What came next would define her life and nearly break it. Marriage 2. Donald Trump, the towers, the tabloids, and the woman on the ski slope. They met at a dinner in New York in 1976 when Ivana was 27 and Donald was 30. She was there promoting a Canadian clothing line. He was already building his name in New York real estate. By multiple accounts, he noticed her immediately, and the courtship moved quickly. On April 9th, 1977, they married at Marble Collegiate Church in Manhattan, with Norman Vincent Peale officiating. They had 3 children in short order: Donald Jr. in 1977, Ivanka in 1981, and Eric in 1984. For a stretch of years in the 1980s, Donald and Ivana Trump were New York. They were on the covers of magazines, at the best tables at the best restaurants, photographed at every major event. The Trump name was going up on buildings across the city: the Trump Tower on Fifth Avenue, the renovation of the Grand Hyatt Hotel, the Trump Plaza, the Trump Taj Mahal in Atlantic City. And Ivana was not simply decorative in any of this. She was a genuine participant. She served as Vice President of Interior Design for the Trump Organization. She oversaw the interior decoration of Trump Tower personally. She was made CEO and President of Trump's Castle Casino Resort in Atlantic City. She managed the Plaza Hotel. These were not honorary titles. The people who worked with her said she brought real rigor and genuine taste to everything she touched. She was at the table, in the meetings, making decisions that mattered. By the late 1980s, Ivana was one of the most visible businesswomen in the entire New York real estate world. She appeared alongside Donald on the Oprah Winfrey Show in April 1988 and on the BBC's Wogan the following month, joint appearances that gave the world a window into what looked, from the outside, like one of the era's great power couples. There was a version of the story where everything had worked out, where the girl from Zlin had come to New York, built something extraordinary, and found a way to keep it. She also became a United States citizen in 1988, a moment she regarded with great pride, given how much effort and planning had gone into getting to the country in the first place. But behind the gleaming surface of their decade in the spotlight, the marriage had been under strain for years. Donald Trump was not, by nature, a man who stayed quietly at home. He was consuming of attention, consuming of space, consuming of everyone around him. People who knew him during that period describe a man whose energy was extraordinary, but whose focus was always, ultimately, on himself. The Trump Organization was growing at a pace that demanded everything from everyone around it, and Ivana was meeting those demands at work, while also raising 3 children in the years before domestic help became as normalized as the lifestyle suggested it should be. She was managing an enormous amount. He was getting most of the credit. The professional friction was real, too. Ivana ran the Plaza Hotel with genuine effectiveness. She was known to be demanding, disciplined, and detail-oriented. Some employees found her style difficult. Others said she was exactly what a property like the Plaza needed. What is not disputed is that she was doing the actual work of running it, and that the relationship between managing that kind of responsibility and being married to the man whose name was above the door created tensions that didn't have obvious resolutions. Joanne, one of Trump's associates, later told the New York Times that Ivana had taken on enormous pressure inside the Trump Organization, and that the boundaries between her professional role and her personal life had collapsed in ways that were deeply uncomfortable. The affair that broke the marriage open began sometime in the mid to late 1980s with a Georgia-born actress and model named Marla Maples. Trump met Maples at a celebrity tennis event in 1985, while still married to Ivana. What started as occasional contact gradually became something more. By 1989, Maples had reportedly been staying on Trump's yacht during extended periods when Ivana was not around, and the relationship had become an open secret among enough people in Trump's orbit that exposure was only a matter of time. People who observed the situation later noted that Donald was not especially careful about concealing things. There were overlapping appearances at the same events, and those paying close attention could read the situation. Ivana, for her part, later said she had sensed something was wrong, but hadn't known the full picture. She had 3 children. She was running a major hotel. She had a life that was full to the point of overflowing, and perhaps that fullness made it easier not to look too carefully at what else was happening outside of it. It surfaced in Aspen, Colorado, at Christmas, in December of 1989. The Trumps were there with their children for the holidays, a family ski vacation at one of the most glamorous resorts in the American West. Marla Maples was also in Aspen. At lunch one day at a restaurant on the mountain called Bonnie's, things came to a head in a way that would be talked about for decades. A young blonde woman approached Ivana directly, introduced herself as Marla, and told Ivana plainly that she was in love with her husband. She asked Ivana whether she loved him. Witnesses at the restaurant recalled Ivana's response as sharp and immediate. She told Maples in no uncertain terms that she had a happy marriage, that she was happy, and that Maples needed to stay away from her and her family. There was nothing ambiguous about it. But the confrontation didn't stay contained for long. Within weeks, the story had made its way into the tabloids in exactly the way that tabloid editors dream about, and by early 1990, it was impossible to go anywhere in New York without seeing some version of the Trump divorce story on a front page. Ivana later described the moment in her memoir, writing that as far as she was concerned, the marriage ended right there at that table in Aspen. She kept the mask on, at least for a few more days, because the children were there. But something had broken that could not be repaired. She filed for divorce in early 1990. What followed was one of the most brutally public divorces in American tabloid history. Donald locked her out of her office at the Plaza Hotel within weeks of her filing. There were legal battles over 4 successive prenuptial agreements they had signed over the course of the marriage, documents that had been renegotiated multiple times as the Trump fortune grew, with Ivana's lawyers now arguing she deserved far more than any of those documents provided for. The prenup fights were vicious and drawn out, with each side arguing about what had been agreed to and what the proper compensation should be for 13 years of marriage and 3 children. A deposition Ivana gave during the proceedings included very serious allegations about an incident that had occurred during the marriage. Allegations she later clarified publicly by saying she did not intend the language she used to be taken in a criminal or legal sense, though she made clear she had felt deeply wronged and violated. The statement she issued was careful and precise, but the underlying message was not ambiguous. Something had happened that should not have happened, and the memory of it had clearly stayed with her. Regardless of how the legal language is passed, the fact that it entered the record at all was a measure of how damaged and painful the end of the marriage had become. While the legal fight played out in the courts, a different kind of war was being fought in the press. The New York Post ran a front-page headline in 1990 that originated with Donald calling the paper directly, describing Marla Maples in terms specifically designed to make Ivana look left behind in the most humiliating way possible. It was calculated, deliberate, and very public. For Ivana, who had spent 13 years building something alongside this man and raising his children, the media war that Donald waged during the divorce proceedings was perhaps as painful as the affair itself. The divorce was finalized in December 1990. Under the terms of the settlement, Ivana received $14 million in cash, a 45-room mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, an apartment in Trump Plaza, and the use of Mar-a-Lago for 1 month per year. Donald also owed $650,000 annually in child support. It was a significant settlement by any measure, made more remarkable by the fact that Trump's real estate empire was, at that precise moment, teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. Ivana's lawyers had done well. She left with real money and real assets at a moment when there was genuine uncertainty about how much was actually left to take. After the divorce interview she gave Barbara Walters on ABC's 2020 in 1991, Donald cut off her alimony payments and announced his intention to take legal action over the interview. The fighting, the maneuvering, the legal posturing. It seemed like it would never end. But Ivana was not the type to sit still and grieve. She reinvented herself with a speed that genuinely surprised people. She wrote books, 2 novels in the early 1990s, followed by a self-help guide about surviving divorce that contained the memorable line advising women to take their ex's wallet to the cleaners before he takes theirs. The book sold well. It found an audience. Women who had been through their own versions of what Ivana had just been through bought it because it was written by someone who had actually been there, and who was not pretending the experience had been anything other than devastating. She launched clothing and jewelry lines through shopping channels on both sides of the Atlantic, QVC in the UK and the Home Shopping Network in the United States. She started an advice column that ran in a magazine for 15 years. In 1995, she established the House of Ivana, a fashion and fragrance company with a showroom on Park Avenue in New York City. She pursued business interests in Croatia. She wrote more books. She went on to publish an autobiography in 2017 called Raising Trump, which focused on her upbringing and the early years of raising her children alongside Donald. She became, in the aftermath of the most public humiliation imaginable, more visible and more commercially active than almost anyone expected. She was also, quietly, a devoted mother during this period. When Donald's name dominated the 2016 presidential campaign and the 3 Trump children were suddenly on every television screen in the country, Ivana made clear in interviews that she had not been given adequate credit for who those children had become. She had raised them, she pointed out. She had been the one who was actually there. It was a fair point, and she made it without apology. She was 41 years old when the divorce was finalized. She had 3 children. She had a settlement, a mansion, and a name that the entire world knew. And somewhere in the bruised aftermath of everything that had just happened, she was, improbably, determinedly, ready to try again. What came next was shorter, messier, and in some ways stranger than anything that had come before. Marriage 3. Riccardo Mazzucchelli and the lawsuit that followed. Ivana had been divorced from Donald for barely a year when a new suitor entered the picture. Riccardo Mazzucchelli was Italian, successful, charming, and persistent. He was an entrepreneur with business interests spread across Europe, and he began pursuing Ivana in 1991 with considerable effort. His early attempts to get her attention included a 10-carat diamond engagement ring, an offering that did not immediately produce the desired result, but that set the tone for how seriously he was apparently taking the pursuit. Ivana did not say yes right away. She was still, by all accounts, processing the wreckage of the Trump marriage, rebuilding her professional life, and figuring out who she was outside of the identity she had shared with Donald for 14 years. They dated on and off through the early 1990s, and eventually, in November 1995, they married. She had written her self-help book about surviving divorce. She had rebuilt her brand. She was ready, she said, to start again. It was Ivana's 3rd marriage, and to people watching from outside, it looked like she was finally finding her footing again after the Trump ordeal. She was 46. She had rebuilt her professional life. She had a new man who adored her, at least in the beginning. The marriage lasted less than 2 years. By 1997, the divorce was underway. And the ugly part wasn't the divorce itself. The ugly part was what came after it. There had been a confidentiality clause in their prenuptial agreement. The clause was straightforward in principle. The details of their private life, their relationship, and the terms of their agreement were to remain private. Mazzucchelli, according to Ivana's legal team, did not honour this clause. When the National Enquirer ran a quote attributed to Mazzucchelli that described their split in terms that implied he had walked away from the marriage of his own accord, essentially claiming he had been the one to end things, Ivana responded with the kind of speed and force that people who had crossed her professionally and personally generally came to regret. She was furious. She fired back publicly that the quote was entirely false. And then her lawyers got involved. She filed a $15 million breach of contract lawsuit against him, citing the violation of the confidentiality provision. The lawsuit sought both financial damages and a permanent injunction preventing him from speaking further about their private affairs. Her position was unambiguous. He had agreed to terms, those terms had been broken, and there were consequences. Ivana's divorce attorney described the filing as a direct response to damage being done to her ongoing business ventures. She had brands, product lines, and a public persona that depended on a certain kind of controlled narrative, and Mazzucchelli, in her view, had blown a hole through it. Mazzucchelli did not go quietly. He filed his own legal action in a British court, suing both Ivana and Donald Trump for defamation over coverage he said had appeared in American publications. Coverage he claimed Donald had a hand in shaping. He told People magazine that he had been thoroughly destroyed by the press and pointed the finger squarely at his former connection to the Trump name. It was, by any description, a full legal war, fought across multiple countries, with both sides claiming injury and demanding satisfaction. Eventually, both suits were settled on terms that neither party ever made public. Whatever the final arrangement was, it brought an end to the legal fighting. But it also drew a sharp line under the relationship itself. Mazzucchelli was never spoken of again by Ivana in any public forum. For a woman who had made a career out of being candid and quotable, that silence was its own kind of statement. The marriage to Mazzucchelli had lasted roughly 2 years. What it cost her, beyond the legal fees, was harder to calculate. After the Trump divorce, and then this, there was a reasonable question about whether Ivana would ever trust the institution of marriage again. For several years after the Mazzucchelli settlement, she didn't try. Instead, she found herself in a longer, more settled relationship with an Italian aristocrat named Count Goffredo Gaetani dell'Aquila d'Aragona Lovatelli. They were together from 1997 until his death in 2005, when he died relatively young. It was a quiet, private relationship compared to everything else in her life, and those who knew her during those years say she was genuinely happy in it. His death hit her hard. She was in her mid-50s. She had outlasted 2 failed marriages and a long-term partner who had died. And then she met someone 23 years her junior, and the whole story took another turn entirely. Marriage 4. Rossano Rubicondi. The $3 million wedding and the man she never really let go. Ivana Trump met Rossano Rubicondi in 2002. He was an Italian actor and model, born in Rome in 1972, 23 years younger than Ivana, a fact that no one who covered the relationship neglected to mention. He was tall, handsome, and by accounts from those around her, genuinely warm toward her in a way that she responded to. They began as friends. and over the course of the following years, that friendship became something more. Rubicondi had described Ivana publicly as an amazing woman, beautiful, smart, powerful, and, he said, young in spirit. She seemed to feel genuinely seen by him, in a way that perhaps the more transactional relationships that had come before had not always provided. By the time they decided to get married, in 2008, they had been together for 6 years. The people in Ivana's circle were not, for the most part, enthusiastic about the development. One of her close friends told New York Magazine that the whole family had been against it, that while Rubicondi worked fine as a boyfriend, the minute the word marriage entered the picture, something shifted. Friends described a situation where Ivana was financially supporting the relationship to a greater degree than made people comfortable, and questioned openly what Rubicondi was contributing beyond his company. Nobody could stand him except Ivana, one socialite told New York Magazine, with the bluntness of someone who had said it plenty of times in private already. But Ivana was not in the habit of being managed by other people's opinions. The wedding was held on April 12, 2008, at Mar-a-Lago, Donald Trump's estate in Palm Beach, Florida. The fact that Ivana's most famous ex-husband was hosting her fourth wedding at his own home said something interesting about where that particular relationship had ended up after nearly 2 decades. Donald and Ivana had arrived, through whatever combination of time and shared children and mutual pragmatism, at something that looked remarkably like friendship. He was there. Ivanka served as her mother's maid of honor. Ivana's ex-sister-in-law, Judge Mary Ann Trump Barry, officiated the ceremony. Donald Jr. gave a speech that, depending on how you interpreted it, was either warmly protective or quietly menacing. He told the groom directly that the Trump family was in the construction business, that they sometimes lost people on job sites, and that Rossano had better treat his mother right. The ceremony cost $3 million. There were 400 guests. It was, by any measure, one of the grandest weddings New York society had seen in years. It was also not without incident. In the weeks before the ceremony, police had reportedly been called to Mar-a-Lago after a disturbance related to a dispute over the prenuptial agreement. Rubicondi was briefly detained. The wedding went forward anyway. The marriage lasted 10 months before Ivana filed for divorce. After the divorce, Ivana was characteristically blunt about the geography of the problem. She told reporters that Rossano wanted to live in Miami and work in Milan, while she was a New Yorker with her family, friends, and businesses all in one place. It was stated plainly, without drama. But the relationship itself did not end with the legal paperwork. They continued to see each other, on and off, in the way that some people who have been genuinely close can never quite settle into clean separation. They appeared together on the Italian version of Dancing with the Stars in 2018, 10 years after their wedding. Ivana said at various points during this period that it was not a full-time marriage, but that she was enjoying it. By June 2019, though, she told Page 6 that the relationship had run its course for the final time, that Rossano spent too much time in Italy and she had moved on. She said she was done with marriage entirely. She had 3 children and grandchildren. She wanted freedom. She wanted to go where she wanted to go. And then, in October 2021, Rossano Rubicondi died. He was 49 years old. He had been ill. Reports from his family described both a melanoma diagnosis and liver cancer in different accounts. His death came from a fall in the bathtub, striking his head with enough force to burst a vein in his lung. His father, Claudio, later told an Italian television program that Ivana had been the only person who knew how ill Rossano truly was during his final months. She had been looking after him quietly, behind the scenes. in the way that someone does when a relationship has moved past romance into something older and harder to name. Ivana sent condolences to his family and made arrangements to send his ashes to them. Reports from that period describe a woman who was visibly shaken. Photographs from around the time of his memorial service in late 2021 showed her looking drawn and fragile in a way that was unfamiliar to people who had watched her project strength for decades. The socialite, who had been her close friend for years, told reporters that Ivana had become increasingly reclusive in the months following Rossano's death. She had stopped going out. She feared getting sick. She was grieving, and she was alone. A friend said at the time that Ivana was overwhelmed, that losing Rossano and being isolated in the way that the world had been recently forcing on people had simply settled into her in a way that was visibly difficult. She had been the last man she'd loved, or whatever the precise word was, for what he had become to her by the end. On July 14th, 2022, Ivana Trump was found at the bottom of the staircase in her home on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. She died of blunt impact injuries from the fall. She was 73 years old. The New York City medical examiner ruled her death accidental. She had been on her way somewhere, as she always was. She just didn't make it this time. The woman she was. When people try to fit Ivana Trump into a single story, they tend to get it wrong in the same direction. They make her a footnote in someone else's narrative. The first wife. The wronged woman on the ski slope. The one who lost to Marla Maples. But the actual sweep of her life is considerably larger than any of those frames. She was a woman who grew up in a locked country and engineered her way out of it before she was 25, using nothing but a friendship, a legal technicality, and an Austrian passport. She crossed an ocean, learned a new language, built a career in modeling, then built a second career as an executive in one of the most aggressive real estate operations in American history, at a time when women were rarely allowed anywhere near that table. She ran a casino. She managed a flagship hotel. She oversaw the interior design of a Fifth Avenue tower that would become one of the most recognizable buildings in New York City. These were not small achievements, and they did not happen because of anyone else's name. She rebuilt a commercial career after a divorce that would have destroyed many people, and she did it with enough energy and invention that the career outlasted the marriage by 3 decades. She wrote books. She launched brands. She gave advice to millions of women about how to put themselves back together after a relationship fell apart. And she did it from genuine experience rather than from theory. She raised 3 children, Donald Jr., Ivanka, and Eric, who all went on to build significant lives of their own, and she never stopped insisting, publicly and privately, that whatever credit was given for those children belonged to her as much as to anyone. Her 4 marriages tell a story, but perhaps not the one that gets told most often. The first was an escape, a practical and necessary transaction with a willing friend, executed with the kind of cool calculation that most 22-year-olds could not have managed. The second was the one that actually shaped her, gave her children and a platform and an identity she would spend the rest of her life renegotiating. The third collapsed into lawsuits and transatlantic legal battles, a reminder that starting over doesn't automatically mean starting right. The fourth produced the grandest wedding of her life and lasted less than a year formally, but the relationship inside it, the strange, enduring, impossible to categorize connection with Rossano Rubicondi, continued in one form or another until his death, which preceded hers by less than a year. She told reporters in 2009, after the 4th divorce was finalized, that she was done. Done with marriage, done with the whole apparatus of it. She had 3 children and grandchildren. She wanted freedom. She wanted to go where she wanted to go. There was something both sad and fiercely dignified about that statement, coming from a woman who had been through what she had been through. And it was also entirely consistent with who she had always been, someone who looked at a wall, figured out how to get past it, and kept moving, whatever the cost. Ivana Trump died on July 14th, 2022. She was 73 years old. She left behind 3 children, 10 grandchildren, and a life story that doesn't fit neatly into anyone else's narrative, which is probably exactly how she would have wanted it. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more fascinating stories.